and we are eager to hear you.
Okay, you cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing.
How can I stop? Yeah, I found the button. Yeah, now you will be able to do it.
Share screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Do you see the slide presentation?
Not yet. Yes.
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 So we are all set.
Yeah.
Hello to you all. Thank you, David, for giving me the opportunity to introduce RegMedXB, a platform of regenerative medicine, a translational platform from bench to bedside. Who am I? In terms of the organization, I'm the medical scientific director. But a little bit more information on my profile. I'm a medical doctor. I also obtained a PhD, and I got trained in internal medicine as subspecialty rheumatology. So I'm a rheumatologist by training from the University of Ghent, Belgium. I left in 1986 Belgium as a postdoc to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, USA. I spent there 5 years as postdoc and 6 years as a group leader. I was recruited back to Belgium, coincidentally, in 1998 at the KU Leuven. So it's not my original university, where I became a full professor, director of a laboratory and a platform Prometheus, as well as chairman of the Department of Rheumatology at University Hospitals Leuven, so a mixed profile clinician at one side and investigator, researcher at the other side, physician, scientist. I did treat patients 2 days a week. I retired from the university in October 2020 and became then officially medical scientific director of the RegMedXB platform. I have been active in my life also as an entrepreneur. I would say a little bit a serial entrepreneur, where I set up and spun off a few companies. The most important one was Tygenix, where I was co-founder. This company was acquired by Takeda in 2018. I also was part of the initiation of my Cell Hub as a spin-off, and I'm on the board of several companies. One was PharmaCell that was taken over, acquired by Lonza also a couple of years ago. This is how it goes in the business. And today I'm board member of several other companies, including in the Netherlands, Neuroplast and Sinus, but also in a few other companies outside of the Netherlands. I love also the entrepreneurial part. What is RegMedXB? RegMedXB is a platform. It's a partnership between the public partners and private partners. Started off in the Netherlands 2016 and Flanders, Belgium joined in 2018. We are dedicated, our mission, to bring new affordable treatments in the niche regenerative medicine to patients. So it's not medicine in general, it's not life science in general, it's regenerative medicine. And we believe also that in order to achieve this, it is important to create an ecosystem which is quite specific and particular for regenerative medicine, and an industrial sector in the regenerative medicine, which is not in the medtech industry, it's not really in the pharma industry yet. So it's a new industrial sector, we believe, that is on the crossroads between the classical medtech and the pharma industry. This is why we believe this is a new system and a new ecosystem that we need here. There are partners, and indeed the new ecosystem is illustrated here by the several partners that are on board. Importantly, and to start with, you have the health foundations, like the Diabetes Funds and the Dutch Heart Foundations, the Ruma Nederland Funds and the Nierstichting, the kidney funds. These are the ones that are essentially initiating a so-called moonshot, which is a research line, a development line to develop new products, because they come up with the resources, also the financial resources, to initiate such a moonshot here. And this is why we have the moonshots that are within these fields, because they have been initiated by these foundations. We have a number of partners from industry, small ones and bigger ones, as you can see here. I can mention Xeltis, I can mention the LifeTech Group, I can mention Sinus. These are all quite important partners working with our organization. And then obviously you have a number of research institutes. In the Netherlands, you have Leiden, Maastricht, Utrecht, and Eindhoven that are part of this. Eindhoven more the engineers, Leiden more the medical and the life sciences people, and Utrecht. And then in Flanders, we have the VIB, the Flemish Institute for Biotechnology, and we have the KU Leuven University of Leuven as university. And finally, and not unimportantly, we have then the regions actively participating and co-funding this initiative, Provincie Noord-Brabant in the Netherlands, for instance, Limburg, Zuid-Holland, and then we have also Flanders in Belgium. So these partners together are established, are the established platform, and you will see that SMEs will go and join, more of them will join institutes. There is increasing demand of other institutes in order to be able to join. So this is a fairly flexible organization that is evolving over time. What is at the very core of our goal is de-risk concepts for further developments toward patients, and this typically for regenerative medicine products. Regenerative medicine as a field has been over-promising and under-delivering. Since I've been in this field since 1994, 1995, there has been a lot of promises coming out, a lot of hopes and hypes, hand in hand with stem cell technology developments, for instance, and new biomaterials. Yet, if you look today, what has reached the patient, and have we seen a paradigm shift, it's kind of disappointing. And that is because, these are complex products that you need to bring in well-defined patients, and many aspects are missing. And this is why we believe that as an organization, we should try to basically fill the gap here, typically from a TRL level 3-4, for which there is a sort of proof of concept in the scientific environment where a good publication is supporting the findings, towards a TRL 7, and TRL 7 is then a phase 2 clinical trial. So we are trying to fill precisely that gap, move from bench to bedside, from proof of concept typically in the mice to proof of concept in men, and this is then typically the phase 1-2A clinical trial, covering TRL level 4, 5, 6. This is where we are focusing on. And this is a very tough gap because it leaves typically the academia. It's a bit too early, mostly for substantial investments by VCs. So we typically have in this space a lack of funding. The people that are working in this space do not have that much expertise, and we don't have that many entrepreneurs in this space that are successful in moving things forward here, especially not at the European side in the first place. So this is our goal, from proof of concept in mice to proof of concept in a patient. Now, to achieve that requires quite some focus and investment of time and resources. And in order to achieve this, we are essentially hinging on 5 pillars. One pillar at your left-hand side is obviously the research excellence. You need to have the research groups, the teams that are capable of moving things forward in the respective moonshots. But that's not enough. You also need business developers, and you need money and capital to help you to move products from early phase to later phase development and eventually into the market. So we have this business development and acceleration pillar. You need to do some of, and we have a seed capital pillar. You need to do a lot of these things, in fact, at the later stages in collaboration with private companies, providing you, for instance, some expertise with regard to manufacturing, for instance. And then finally, at your right-hand side, you see infrastructure. Indeed, to make the typical RegMed products, which are typically combination products of biomaterials and living cells, creating 3D living implants to replace tissue and tissue function. There is very little, I would say, manufacturing technology available, and therefore we believe that it was important, and it is important, to have infrastructure in place that can provide us also for our early clinical trials the kind of products we are envisioning here. So I will comment on a few of these pillars here. The moonshots first. I already indicated that the moonshots started. Why did we make these choices? It was very simple, because the health foundations were willing to come forward with the resources, with funds, to initiate these moonshots, these tracks to develop new treatments for the patient. And as you see here, we have 4 moonshots so far. One is essentially one for an osteoarthritic joint, a damaged joint. One is for a failing heart. One is for a failing pancreas, specifically islets of Langerhans, the insulin-secreting beta cells. And one is for the failing kidneys. So in the AOA moonshot, we are creating implants to replace the typical plastic metal ones of total prosthesis, but implants which are resolvable and living. For the heart, we are focusing on developing protocols to regenerate the failing heart, ex vivo even. For the diabetes moonshot, we are developing a device that we are filling with stem cell-derived beta cells to be implanted in patients and therefore replace the function of the islets of Langerhans. And for the kidney, we are trying to build what we call kidney auxiliary kidney tissues that are partially replacing then specific aspects of kidney function. This is the diabetes moonshot. So we take from the patient cells, we reprogram them into iPS cells. We create a bank, a master cell bank. There is a GMP transition obviously associated with these. And we produce from these stem cells then beta cells that are insulin responsive upon glucose exposure. And then these cells are loaded into the scaffold. That's the second part of the moonshot, where we create and build scaffolds, deliver devices. We also call it T-bags, in which we put the cells and then implant this in the patient. So we have a device implanted in the patient with living beta cells that are replacing the function of the islets of Langerhans, and thereby hopefully making a patient with diabetes type 1 in the first place insulin independent. That obviously is the goal at the end of the day. In the osteoarthritis moonshot, at the right-hand side, you see we would like to replace important parts of the joint, like in the knee, the hemiprosthesis, replace the hemiprosthesis by a living implant, typically for younger patients. But obviously, this is a big piece here, so we try in the step before that to do it for smaller joints, like the basis on the thumb. And we are today really busy with making what we call an osteochondral plug, which is a cartilage bone implant that repairs the larger defects in joint surfaces, the knee typically, and also in the knee, as a stepwise approach. As we get better, we can increase in size and we can deliver a specific shape, and that brings us then to replace a complete biological joint here. In the cardiovascular moonshot, we are focusing on heart failure, which means we have very little, if any, that a heart can replace so far. We have the transplantation market, of course, where there are shortages and a number of challenges out there. We have the total artificial hearts, we have assist devices, but all these approaches definitely have a number of challenges here. And from that perspective, we are essentially building ex vivo platforms, allowing us to take out the heart of the patient, the dying heart or failing heart, and to recover it ex vivo and reimplant it in the patient. Very challenging and very, I would say, disruptive in thinking here, but the heart in the box, being the perfusion bioreactor technology with the tools to monitor the heart and its performance, are at the very heart of this moonshot. In the kidney moonshot, we start from stem cells. They can be either adult stem cells or the typical iPS cells, embryonic stem cells, for which we create kidney organoids. Kidney organoids are essentially small kidneys, mini kidneys, the nephrons, that can either consist of glomerular parts or tubuloid parts. Some of them are more tubuloids, especially the one from adult stem cells. The other ones are more glomerular filtration units, and we consider them as auxiliary kidney tissues that either in bioartificial kidneys or as implants can be implanted for patients and therefore assist kidney function, and therefore, for instance, either avoiding hemodialysis or improving existing hemodialysis technologies. And then finally, we have a new moonshot coming soon. We call this the Eye Moonshot, where the Eye Foundation was willing to come up with resources to initiate a new moonshot, where in the first place we will start building corneal implants for very well-defined patient populations, also using stem cell technologies and specific biomaterial technologies. Interestingly is that we have also what we call enabling technologies that are crossing moonshots, because indeed by building all these regenerative medicine implants, in general living functional implants, there is always going to be the aspect of transplant immunology. And we have a immunology platform. This is shared by Frans Klaas in Leiden, that is studying the immunology and immunogenicity of the tissues we are generating, organoids we are generating, and how to deal with this immunogenicity when we are going to implant in patients. There are several companies involved helping to do some specific analysis here. Another platform is the scaling, because obviously from mice to man is in general 2 to 3 log scales increase in number of cells and size of tissues. And these expansion and differentiation programs and the scaling of this is also together with universities and companies in order to achieve these. So these platforms are going across moonshots. Obviously, it's not for one application, but for all applications, we have the same challenges. And we are attacking these in these enabling technology platforms here. Now, this is the science and the scientific developments and the technology associated with it, but obviously there is also an important business valorization part. And here you see we have business development teams and we have capital. And these two are then useful or helping us to move things closer to the market or eventually to licensing. So in the valorization aspect, we have on one side here our business developers, our impact managers that are helping to, in the first place, by networking, identifying the researchers and specific projects or companies, bringing these together with eventually then the technology transfers offices of specific universities, organize workshops around specific product developments and community events so we can identify which are the players we can bring together and move specific dossiers forward. And then we have resources available. We call that innovation vouchers. There's a small amounts of money, typically 25K, 30K, up to 50K, where we help the groups or the potential groups working on specific product developments prepare their dossier for investment. If, for instance, do an IP exercise. How strong is our IP? Can we improve our IP position? Where is the competition? These kind of things can be explored with the help of eventually some experts in the field to improve the dossier here. In some cases, it helps us to overcome some final hurdles. For instance, there is some aspect of technology we need to find in order to move forward in the manufacturing. Small scale funding can help to take these steps here. And then eventually to create then a spin out from academia if attractive or sufficiently attractive. And obviously this is then associated also by a business plan and some financial advisors, and can lead to what we call a successful dossier, where the first funds that has at this moment about 9 million in the bank, together with then a mentoring board, can help then these potential initiatives that move forward towards the clinic and the market to move forward here. So as you can see in the left-hand side, these are typically functions that are filled out, that are pursued by our impact officers, while the investment first fund is actually run by a fund manager, professional investment managers that are helping to identify and move dossiers forward here. With these subsidies, you can see here, the money that is in the first funds, you can either get a subsidy to identify opportunities or do some additional jobs that are necessary to make the dossier more attractive. There is already then at that time a possibility of interaction with the mentoring board, and one can already discuss on pre-seed funds. What have we done so far in the last 3 to 4 years? We have identified about 98 projects that could be potential players into this, into the rheumatics B and cardiovascular niche. We have explored 55 of the dossiers. We have had a number of meetings. Essentially, from these dossiers, a number of them were declined. A number of them were awarded vouchers. And some of them are under assessment here. And here you can see the timelines where we really started in 2020. A few projects were completed and closed, either with funding or say, thank you very much, this is just not ready or ready to go ahead. We had then some projects which are typically reg med, some projects typically more cardiovascular, and then somewhere overlaps between the two. Very practical. One company, Target, was set up with seed funds in 2020 and obtained a Series A financing of 39 million in 2022. This is really a success already. We have the River Biomedics, which has received seed funds in 2021. And then we have two other companies which are in the pipeline with pre-seed funds in order to move forward and come up with the first seed funds, hopefully in the coming year or two from now. That for the business valorization and I would say initial support of dossiers leading to potential spin-off, but it could eventually also lead to licensings. That is also possible. It does not necessarily mean it always has to be a spin-off here. An important part of the organization has been the infrastructure. But indeed, if we look at the field of regenerative medicine products, especially then the typical combination products, advanced biomaterials in the context of a cell-based implant, then we see that manufacturing is still deficient and is not at what we call the industrial scale. So one of the goals of the RegMedXB platform is precisely bringing these manufacturing technologies together in facilities that can then lead to successful product development that are not only successful in terms of that the product is alive and functional, but is also cost effective. That also maximizes then patient access, which means it has to be affordable, but also at the same time they need to be commercially viable. So in this context, obviously the aspect of our business developers identifying these opportunities is an ongoing exercise for sure. This initiative has been majorly impacted by a funding that we received in 2022 from the National Growth Funds for the so-called pilot factory, where we got 56 million, supplemented with support from the regions. We have almost 100 million euro to really successfully develop these manufacturing facilities. They took over quite nicely with facilities in Leiden, in Utrecht, in Eindhoven, and in Maastricht. And the facilities also in Flanders, but this is outside of the funding in the Netherlands. Flanders has a separate funding, the Orbit funding, for the manufacturing platform in Flanders, but obviously we are in the process of connecting these so that these facilities can help each other to develop these advanced products. For those that are interested, you can go on websites and look into these setups, these organizations, the Smart Biomaterial Consortium, SBMC in Eindhoven, NextGen and LUMC in Leiden, the Innovation Center of Advanced Therapies in Utrecht, and the Region Biomedical in Maastricht. All are what we call pilot lines from the total system, the one pilot factory, that all have a number of expertises and focuses in this field of application, the RegMedXB field. Because indeed they can deliver not only products to the RegMedXB platform for early clinical trials, but they can also produce or deliver research and development aspects, processing, validation, and scale-up of manufacturing, ongoing exercises. Here you can read on the slide what are all the different aspects on which these different pilot lines are working and are making progress. I would like to draw your attention on the GMP simulation set. We realize that very few people are trained in this good manufacturing practice technology, the GMP transition that is necessary for RegMed products in most cases. And therefore, we need to increase the number of human resources that build knowledge in this field. And therefore, this simulation platform in Utrecht is certainly helping to train and fund students so that we can increase the amount of human resources, the number of, I would say, well-trained people to come into the market and start helping companies to build their portfolio in the manufacturing of these type of products. And finally, yes, this organization is after all a reasonably complex and needs obviously a proper governance. So we have a supervisory board with a representative also from Flanders of 8 members that are supervising and are controlling the board of directors. Our general director, Bernard Muller, you see here in the middle, myself being the medical scientific director. We have a business development director, also an operational director, and then importantly, a patient advocate. It's not executive, but it's part of the board of directors, because if we are developing products, we want to hear from the start the patients and the patient view on the development of products. The supervisory board is also connecting with a strategic advisory board with a number of representatives throughout all the partners, helping us to think of the longer term approaches to take. And we have an important international scientific advisory board giving feedback and input to the scientific advisory board that provides then feedback to the moonshot leader teams and the technology platforms in how to proceed and how to make sure that progress stay focused with a sufficient sense of urgency. And that is obviously one of the challenges, because you are really moving already out of the academic environment and much more in the product development environment, closer to a general corporate and company mentality. I briefly mentioned here that Flanders has a separate subsidiary here. And this is something that in the future we consider that there would be a subsidiary potentially in France, and a subsidiary in Germany, and a subsidiary in other countries, with a managing board and a coordinator that connects to the Dutch organization and make sure that there is sufficient synergism between all these. And finally, the organization is actually closing a first cycle. You can see here on the bottom of the slide, 2023. Indeed, by the end of 2023, we are closing the first round of the RegMedXB platform. And we are initiating right now, in fact, the negotiations are ongoing, and next, what we call a scale-up of the organization, where we not only are hoping to obtain sufficient funding from all the respective partners which have supported us in the past, but we also are fully in the process of mobilizing additional EU funding and private funding to strengthen the organization and make us even more competitive. Not only there is an increase in terms of funding and strength of the organization, we are also working on what we call a geographical scale-up, which means connecting increasingly and intensively to other regions in Europe, including, for instance, other regions in the Netherlands. A few of them have been left out so far, but also other regions in other European countries, like the Aachen region in Germany, the Loire region in France. These are ongoing exercises to start bridging and making the platform, I would say, even more international than so far. So finally, a few take-home messages. Perfectly in time here. RegMed, or the regenerative medicine, is a niche that moves really from care to cure. In the regular medical environment, we take care of patients with a disease, we give them drugs. In many cases, they need to continue to take these drugs, certainly in chronic diseases, for a long time. We never really cure them. And that becomes very cost intensive, obviously, for our societies with the aging population. We hope that we can, at least for a number of patients, end up with cure. That means that the treatment may be expensive, but the buck stops there. That there will be no additional cost accumulating over time, because we are restoring the tissue of organ function. Nice example, diabetes type 1. If we are successful in implanting functional beta cells or pseudo islets of Langerhans that are replacing the function of the islets of Langerhans, and this for a long time, then the cost stops for the society. The products in this niche, regenerative medicine, are typically ATMPs or MRATs, so the advanced therapy medicinal products in Europe, or regenerative medicine advanced therapies in the United States. Separate regulatory track, different from the classical medtech setting, very different from the typical drug development tracks. So that obviously makes it a quite challenging environment. Therefore, we believe you need your separate ecosystem, you need your separate industrial developments, because this is a new world opening up here, where manufacturing at scale is a real challenge and needs to become industrial. What we mean at scale, that implies automation, robotics, closed systems. These are the kind of things that will need to be introduced in the manufacturing platforms for these type of products here. In order for this field to become more successful, the ecosystem, building the ecosystem is per definition a must, because it's a multidisciplinary environment. It's engineering meeting life sciences. it's translational, it's new technology platforms with all kinds of new technologies going from single cell RNA sequencing over advanced biomaterial technology over enhanced and sophisticated biocenters in perfusion bioreactors. And all that at scale requiring some level of industrialization is obviously what we need to bring together here, and this is what we are trying to create. And finally, it needs to unite public and private partners. This field will need to be covered and supported by the public domain for at least a decade, I think, because the developments needed are still huge. The challenges are still quite substantial, and the private industry is not able to carry all these challenges. So this is where public and private partners need to join. And obviously, as an organization, we are not a research platform. We are trying to focus on what we call early clinical translation, specifically then to de-risk potential new solutions that we can then bring forward and move forward to the patient and to the market. And I think that is my main message. I thank you for your attention. Obviously, ready for questions.
Okay, Frank, thanks a lot. That was a very interesting and comprehensive introduction, I would say, to this very ambitious and complex, I would say, too, initiative. So I would like to start with one question. So if you can, because I mean, the whole initiative is based around this concept of the moonshots. Mm-hmm. In your case, or RexMed, it's aiming at building an ecosystem in regenerative medicine. So it's like in a very specific field around this idea of the moonshots, of these 4 diseases and potentially a 5th one. So how do you see, for instance, I mean, do you think that this concept of the moonshot could be, for instance, applied in the building of an ecosystem of a larger scale, for instance, like a national scale?
Well, essentially, we are in the business of building body replacement parts. Because we have now these 4 moonshots, but essentially, you should look at it like a car. A car has an engine, it has a muffler, and has many other parts, and a battery, and so on. So essentially, in this field, we are building body replacement parts, and so there are many aspects to this, requiring an increase in size of the platform, an industrialization, and bring in additional partners with new technologies to make it all possible. So at the end of the day, it has to become a quite vast set of partners that are all going to deliver parts, for instance, of the manufacturing chain. And remember, when you build a Tesla, when you build a car, the Tesla is an assembly of many different parts with many different technologies to come to that end product. Yeah. And in this field, regenerative medicine, by building these body replacement parts, it's fairly essential. We will need many new aspects of technologies in order to be able to come up with successful manufacturing platforms leading to end-stage functional tissue replacement parts. So this is just the beginning of what you see here, the first steps, but it will go way beyond what we have here, hopefully.
Yeah. Questions, anybody? I have a question from Alex. Yeah, so Alex asked, so yeah, I have a couple of questions about that. So if you can just, he asking for if you can...
the innovation vouchers, yeah. So essentially, yeah, as the way it works is it's quite straightforward. Our impact officers are, as I showed also in the slides, are all the time looking around. They are looking in the niche regenerative medicine. Not only they are looking within the moonshots for opportunities, but also outside moonshots. Even in other universities and meetings, they say, okay, this seems to be an interesting project. They talk to these people, and then from these, I would say, first interactions, there is some idea moving forward that this could be a product that could be attractive for the market. And that's when the impact officers say, okay, this looks interesting. This is dossier which can lead to a product development within reasonable timelines. There is sufficient maturity here, but there are aspects missing. And then essentially, in many cases, they talk to me and a few other of the senior people, where they propose or they discuss with us dossiers and ask if this would be sufficiently interesting to move forward. And then we essentially give the green light, for instance, to give an additional 25K to look into what we had recently, the IP portfolio. People are underestimating the IP portfolio. In order to really do your homework, you not only have to look how strong is my portfolio, but where is the competition out there? Where would we potentially have problems? And preparing a proper IP portfolio with an assessment of that is typically requiring 25, 30K, a little bit more. Well, these are aspects then that we are investigating. So this is where these vouchers are serving for. An ID that seems to be attractive, a product that can be developed, but there are a few parts missing before we feel confident to move forward into the next phase. And that's where we are spending some vouchers.
And how does it work? I mean, with terms of like, so because I mean, you are providing these resources. So what is the agreement with let's say that it works, you generate an IP. So how that it's arranged?
But we are not generating anything. So the only thing is what we are doing is we are providing some financial support to improve the quality and the attractiveness of the dossier. And we have no further impact potentially on this, in this sense that the investigators are still always, I would say, free to decide with their universities if they want to go ahead or not ahead and these kind of things. So it's a mutual interaction. It's relatively small tickets. That changes obviously once we decide that the dossier becomes really attractive and they may enter then the first funding with pre-seed funds. We are talking about more substantial commitments then, and then obviously the game changes. But RegMedXB is never is helping, is facilitating, is supporting. We are not controlling. We are not taking over to some extent the dossiers. That's not the intention.
Okay, so here I have a question in Spanish, so I will have to translate. So it says, a message for investors that are not familiar with the regenerative medicine industry. What are the timelines? Where it's a good moment to jump in a project? What should be analyzed, or what they should be look at and evaluate?
Obviously, this is a very complex question. How do you bring sufficient money on board, and how do you convince VCs to support your dossier? Well, I can give a 1-hour lecture on this.
Yeah.
Because I did in my life already more than 100 VCs also, so we start to know the ropes of the game here. I would say in the first place, it may sound strange here, but I would say stay as long as possible away from VCs. Try to build a dossier with different resources, some private funds, some public funds, so that you have a dossier that really becomes attractive, and that essentially brings you some real value to the average investor. And that is something that is a challenge these days, because don't forget, the investment climate today, the last 6 months and in the next year will not be good. It will be very, very competitive. And I hear that most investors even say, if you don't have proof of concept in the patient, we are not yet that much interested. If you are developing new treatments for patients, it's different if you are developing technologies and this and that. That's somewhat of a different ballgame. But if you want to say we have a RegMedXB treatment, we would like to move into the patient, into the market, and that's precisely what we try to do with the RegMedXB platform. Is through public resources and other supports generate the proof of concept in the patient. Because that gives you a lot of, it's very simple. It increases the value of your dossier with a factor 10 almost. You de-risk the dossier because you demonstrate that it is feasible, that it is safe, and then you even see things happening in the patient which are reminiscent, for instance, of what you have seen in the animal model systems. So my answer is, number one, VCs, yes, but choosing the right moment, in my view today, is at the time you have a dossier that provides proof of concept in the patient. That would be the better time. And in order to use money to move forward to that level, you have European fundings, you have local fundings, you have the European Innovation Commission that has the different funding mechanisms to help you to move forward with a dossier without necessarily from the start have to deal with VCs. And this is what we do in also RegMedXB, give pre-seed money with very little strings attached so that you can really make the dossiers more attractive, or make choices as, okay, this is just not going to be good enough. Because don't forget, in our pre-seed assessment, we are also doing a health technology assessment. We are talking to patients. Is this really what we are looking for? Is this going to be an added value for the patient? So it is not, we are not in the business of commercializing any RegMedXB treatment. We are in the business of defining a treatment that can give a paradigm shift for the patient at an affordable price under acceptable, I would say, commercial and valorization context. So it's a little bit different from, I have something and I want to sell it as quickly as possible in the market. That's not really our first goal.
Yeah. And so if I got correctly, so the whole idea of RegMed, it's a non-profit organization.
It is non-profit.
It's a non-profit. Okay.
Yeah,
so
we are there to facilitate and to help.
Okay. And so how does it work? Two questions with respect, because I mean, it looks like a pretty complex organization. So what are the challenges? How do you manage to first to work with the universities? First of all, what are the arrangements in terms of the IP and collaborations and things like that? How does it work? I mean, how do you say the arrangements with them?
Well, so far the IP is simple. All IP stays with the universities.
All right.
So RegMedXB has no IP. If researchers from one university are developing things and they generate IP, it's the property of the university, and the university decide how to proceed with this. So far, it may somewhat be adapted for the future here, but at least at this moment, IP stays within universities and stays with what I would call collaborative agreements that have been signed at the beginning of the moonshot and the research progress. So we have a consortium agreement that defines the terms with the first right of refusal for participating partners. We are updating our consortium agreement so that it becomes attractive to most players in the field of regenerative medicine and so on. But I would say from that perspective, the RegMedXB organization as such has not any direct impact or IP on what is going here. The biggest challenges, in my view, is the bridge towards the clinical trial, the real translational challenge. So universities, I can manage universities and I can motivate them to deliver the proof of concept from a mouse into a more relevant animal model system, for instance, before you go to the patient. But suppose that indeed you have developed already some scaling and that you demonstrate in an animal, a larger animal model relevant to the potential patient, that it seems to be working well. Before you can start a clinical trial and obtain clinical trial authorization through the new clinical trial regulation, you need to build a preclinical dossier. And the preclinical dossier, if it's a cell-based approach, there is GMP transition, there is characterization of your cell population. If there are biomaterials involved, there is the technical dossier that needs to be built up. So the real challenging part of translation is, I call this the second step before you can get your clinical trial authorization. This is where academia is very poor. The motivation for academicians to participate in this or to actively contribute in this is low. And there is where we see that as an organization, we should take over, and we are doing this increasingly, we taking over some of the responsibilities, including putting together the dossiers, getting the regulatory feedback, doing the potential health technology assessment, do the GMP transition with our pilot fabrics. So this is where the organization RegMedXB will become hopefully then increasingly important for the future, realizing this second step in translation, which is obtaining then your clinical trial authorization and building then the preclinical dossier. And that is where we feel we are trying to put together then teams of people that are motivated to pick this up. And not all academicians are interested, or I would say are interested to do this kind of work, because most of what you do is not really publishable also. It is hard work putting together in dossiers in order to get then your approval for the clinical trial. And therefore putting teams together that can handle this is what we are really doing now in the respective moonshots.
So I don't know if there's any other questions from the audience. I have another one, of course. So what is your plan? Because I mean, you are just investing in more or less in mid-stage, early-stage projects. You are spinning out companies, but in order just to go into clinical trials and go into the market, it's that what are the exits you expect in your projects?
Well, it's a good question, because before we are pushing the button, we are in 2 moonshots, for instance, we are discussing now to push the button to go to the first clinical trial. But before you push that button, you also have to have a scenario of further development after then your early phase clinical trial. And that scenario, you need to anticipate that scenario. And this is also where the first funds and the vouchers for the first funds are useful, because you can ask a person, and eventually even an expert, to spend 3 months in thinking, in writing the business plan and identifying steps forward after a first successful clinical trial. And there are different scenarios that can be developed, and depending on the application and in which fields you are, it can end up if there is IP generated and proof of concept is delivered, it can end up in a license to a company that is already busy in the field. Simply licensing out. And if your dossier is well prepared and you know the partners that would be interested, before you start, you can even already identify these partners and initiate even some discussions. And in case it's successful, would you be interested to take licensing? You know that many IP and university generated stays as IP, and there is nobody coming in to really pick up licenses. This is because people are not working in that space. You need to build your dossier towards finding the proper licensees for this. An alternative might be to set up the classical spin-off, but then if you have that in mind, make sure you have identified and also the potential team that will carry this, because spin-off is one thing. VCs will not be interested if you don't have a team, and the team needs to have some level of credibility and so on. So building the team that takes then the dossier forward in a spin-off setting is obviously also something that you have to anticipate. The third possibility that you can say is we essentially think this is a market that is going to be very limited for a very small group of patients. For instance, for our cardiac moonshot, we have identified a genetic disease for which there are only 600 patients in the whole Europe present, while here you develop a gene therapy and you keep it in the public domain, and you try to basically close deals with university hospitals and reimbursement agencies, just as we have stem cell transplantation done, that in 1 or 2 centers of excellence, this therapy will be brought to patients at a specific cost that you agree upon before you even start. So these are treatments that may even remain within the public domain and that are, I would say, are extremely orphan indications. So your question is very right, and you have to address these before you even push the button from the clinical trial, because it's not really justified to go through the clinical trial and afterwards wonder, and what are we going to do next?
This is what, unfortunately, with startups and spin-off, this is a very common case. Let's say that you go to clinical trials just waiting for an exit, and when the exit doesn't happen, you're just like, okay, what now?
Well, the first funds is typically foreseeing also vouchers with our impact manager to address these typical kind of questions.
But something, I mean, just hearing you talking and from the ecosystem you show, you don't have this kind of approach that in biotech is quite common, that maybe led to the current crisis. Like, if you see the money, just take it. So you are more focused on the, let's say, on the maturation or having a good case rather than just getting money to finance it. And what I see in your ecosystem is like you still you don't have there like big pharma, how are you planning to interact with them? Is something that you would like just to have it on board? What is your take there?
Well, number one is that big pharma is not yet really in the business of regenerative medicine. Huh? They are progressively starting to join in specific applications, but big pharma is still staying away from it. And one of the reasons is simply because the entire manufacturing technology is still in its infancy. Huh? Big pharma is getting interested in cellular therapies, which is then the cell suspensions and engineered cell suspensions. So gene cell therapy is getting more into the realm of the big pharma. But in RegMedX B, we are not focusing on these kind of products. We are focusing on these living functional implants that are replacing or repairing tissue function. And that is where there are also still quite a lot of engineering challenges. We are more what I would call the tissue banks of the 21st century. It's in the previous century and still today. We are collecting donor hearts from donors and lungs and this and that. Well, we are essentially entering in a new era of I would say tissue banks, but producing replacement tissues from the shelf to some extent for the patients. Pharma is not yet in this business. So I would say our diabetes moonshot is closer to pharma interest. But remember, the big player in the diabetes moonshot right now with the beta cells is Vertex. And Vertex is not typical a pharma company. So what we see is that there are other companies starting to join this kind of new field and this new ecosystem, which previously have been in different areas or in manufacturing business and not necessarily the typical big pharma players. So we'll see how this is evolved. We keep an eye on this, but I would say in most cases when big pharma is heavily interested, it probably doesn't belong anymore to our portfolio.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. Okay, so if there don't have any question left, Frank, thanks a lot for your time. It was great to listen to this initiative. I think that gave a lot of ideas and inspiration for the people there. We have people from Argentina and also Argentinians around the world too. So yeah, I think it was pretty interesting to know about this. And yeah, I mean, particularly myself, I already in contact with people from your network. So we are having discussions with RexMed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I will be following pretty closely how RexMed does. And yeah, thanks a lot for your time, Frank. It was a great talk.
I do understand the Spanish statements here. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and see you next talk then in 2 weeks for Achilles' presentation on how to create a